On Stories of Self, we go on journeys into the lives of ourselves and others. We see how stories connect, how they diverge, and how we can create our worlds and solve our problems. This is the real-life remix of storytelling, which is so often stranger than fiction. So come and sit around the fire, chill by the ocean, or get a coffee with me, as I delve into the stories of self that make, break, and remake us. Some stories are dramatic, some are serene, some will magically mirror you, and some will be delightfully different. I'm your host, Katie Reeve Arnold, and this is Stories of Self. We all have stories to tell. These are the stories of our lives. Past affects the present, affects the future, and we have choice in how we tell and what we tell to others and ourselves. Our stories create connections and differences. Whether we see it ourselves or not, both can be freeing. We write our stories every day. By telling our stories and listening to those of others, we can find out more about ourselves and feel the connection and peace that comes from being and sharing our unique selves in a sea of unique people. It is our differences as well as our similarities that make us a stronger whole. We are telling ourselves things as we tell the story of our lives. I thought I'd kick off with some things I told myself about starting this podcast. Even once I got past the issues of fluctuously gaslighting my excited self by immediately asking myself, but who's going to want to listen to you? I encountered other, more hidden hold-ups creeping in. So, first, how did I get over the issue of being my own personal gaslight? Well, I announced the podcast in a friendship group with people I knew would ask me about it. In doing that, I removed the option of not doing it. This didn't quite remove the issue, but it did immediately calm it down because launching this podcast was just something that I was doing. There was no not doing it left with which to pull in the opposite direction. So everything calmed down a little bit from there. I was going to do it. I also set a tentative date, which actually I launched 10 days after. But life happens, and in the grand scheme of things, I think setting a date and succeeding 10 days later than that is a win over not setting a date at all and it just dragging on indefinitely. Although, of course, it depends what the deadline is for, I guess. Another story I realized I was telling myself in this process was the story of failing by missing the deadline. That's the deadline I arbitrarily pulled out of thin air because it sounded like a nice number. I'd managed to start giving myself a hard time about it, which obviously made everything a lot more fun. I was my own worst enemy there. I noticed that giving myself a hard time about missing that deadline was actually a lot like a feeling I'd had for much of my 30s, where I was giving myself a hard time for not having achieved all I thought I would have by that age. It actually took until after I turned 40, and quite a spectacular mental collapse, before I started to realise that the things I had not achieved, for which I was giving myself a hard time, actually fell into two categories. So the first one was things other people or society had suggested I should have achieved, but I hadn't. And the second was things I wanted to achieve, but I hadn't. Now, I'm not saying that there's never any overlap between the two, but where the overlap was between those two, I had achieved it. So, right, interesting. Where society and the outside world agreed it was important, and where I actually wanted it, and found it important myself, I had made it happen. It was where I couldn't align the two that I hadn't. So for this, I spent some time thinking about what I really want now, and to create now. Not what I wanted 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but what I want now, because it changes sometimes. And that's okay. Things change, we change. It's an illusion to think anything is stable. Hell, even the past changes. but that's another branch of the Stories of Self for another time before I get too excited and try and cram everything into one marathon 48-hour episode. Back to giving myself a hard time over the self-imposed deadline. Well, back when I was considering what I hadn't achieved, I wrote a list of things I wanted to achieve and had. It was about equal in length to the list of things that I or society had wanted me to achieve and I hadn't. It made me feel a bit better, but I was still on the journey, right? Life wasn't over. There was time. Then suddenly I realised that there were a lot of things I'd done and achieved and loved and enjoyed missing from that list. Because they were the things that I'd never had a long-term dream to do or achieve. They had come up in life organically, in finding a way past a problem, in a moment of inspiration, in a chance encounter, in allowing myself to flow in life with others, in being open to opportunities I'd never considered. So now I had 4 lists. The first, a list of things other people or society had suggested I should have achieved but hadn't. And we'll get to that one in a future story of self. The second, the things I wanted to achieve, but I hadn't yet. The third was the list of things that I had wanted to do myself and I had done. And the fourth was the list of things that I had never known I'd wanted to do. I had never thought of really in advance, but I'd done them. And that fourth list was at least 3 times as long as the others, much, much longer. So one of the stories that we tell ourselves is that we need to plan everything or it won't happen. And I guess we do in some way. I told you I planned a podcast and here you are listening to it. But we weight importance on the things we plan and see coming, or we want to see happen. And we don't give equal importance to spontaneous, organic, flowing events. Plans are important, but being open to the unexpected, to things that might just come up in your life, to opportunities, is just as important. So now I felt better about missing my deadline, because I looked at all these beautiful, wonderful life moments and achievements that I had never had a plan, goal or deadline for. They just came up and I was open to them. I'm not saying that none of them took work or planning once they came up. I'm saying that they were never on a bucket list, whether as something given to me by other people or by society or by myself. So after I got over my gaslighting of myself and my fear of failure over missing a random date that I had declared as a deadline, I'd started to recognise some less obvious, more insidious stories I was telling myself, which were having a big impact on the story of my life. It had to be perfect. This was a huge one. You might have already noticed that I have managed to move past this one, and I'm here in all my imperfectly unique personal perfection as who I am. This is because in waiting for perfection, I was waiting forever. I was holding myself in a static position. Yes, I was working on expanding my knowledge and experience, but I was never going to know it all. That's just not an option. Plus, I look back on the moments in my life where I was a know-it-all, seeking only for success, and I cringe. Because that's not a fun person to be around, or a fun way to live life. I had missed the point. The point of life is not purely to be right. The point is to live with joy and compassion. Nothing much then. I just spent years missing the point of life. Well, one of the points of life. But again, that's another whole episode. So, like many things that are core issues, I felt this perfectionism come up in my story that I've been telling myself as a roadblock over and over again. Wait here! Turn round! Go back! It screamed. But that's okay. Whatever or wherever we've been before, we know to be survivable. Survivable. That's important. It's an important word. Survivable, not safe or good for us or where we want to be going forwards. Just survivable. Perfectionism was a core issue for me, a key part of the story I was telling myself to protect myself. And it had gotten me this far. And in coming this far, I already had lived to create lists of achievements and joys in my life. But was it helping me now? now that I wanted to step out of doing the things that society and I both agreed were important and into the realm of things that were important to me, but that other people might have a different opinion on. No, it couldn't help me now to just spend more hours learning from others or polishing known agreed fact, because this was about stepping into creating, as me, from me. Not living in an echo chamber. If all we do is reproduce something that's come before us, yeah, it's safe. It's very safe. Everybody's agreed that that's okay, that that's all right. But all it is becoming an echo of what went before. We want to be ourselves. We want to express as ourselves. It's a human need. And in creating from me, that would never be perfect. And simultaneously, it would always be perfect. It would be perfectly me at the time I did it. But that me would be changing as I lived and grew. Now I had to recognize that my story was changing. And it needed to change so that I could step forward. What I was bringing was dynamic. There was no one right, so there could be no getting it right. Did I have the right jingle? I've actually been learning piano and I made it up myself. Did I have the right cover artwork? Well, I enjoyed doing it, and I'm learning to use Procreate for illustration. But it wasn't perfect. Did I have the right photo for the cover art? According to many people I've spoken to, and you can have a look yourself, apparently no. No, I didn't. But it kind of makes me laugh. The angle is at once good and bad, and I actually have a problem with body dysmorphia, so it's never going to look good to me. And while it's never going to look good, it might as well look odd or interesting. Have a look at it and see what you think. Was my image right? Could I come across as an authority? Was it okay to be seen talking about these things? Would other people think badly of me? What would other people think? My underlying perfectionism, even as it was being solved, was giving way to a new series of roadblocks. A new set of stories that I had been telling myself, which were holding me back from living the story of my life fully as I wanted and felt was my own true story of self. We all fear judgment and want to belong. It's natural, and in that we hone an image that we present and which we judge, always by past experience. We judge it and we find out whether it's safe. But this, at best, is only part of who we are, and at worst, it is a mask that hardly shows any of who we really are. We all balance a fear of all of us being seen, even the bits of us that are true, but we feel we had to hide them in order to belong and be accepted. We balance that fear of all of us being seen with a fear of not being seen for all of who we are. And this conflict drives what I describe as an inner war. I describe it as that because that is what it felt like when it happened to me. In that war, we have unintentionally created a no-win situation, a paradox. We fear being seen as all of who we are, but fear not being seen as all of who we are at the same time. Yet as life and we change, that no-win situation is just another of the stories we tell ourselves. We are applying past reasoning to a current event, and this is not necessarily a bad move. It tends to keep us alive and protect us from past issues. But as things change, it can equally create as many issues as it solves and leave us existing in a known survivable form, rather than living in the unknown creativity of who we are and what has never been before. Stepping forward into what you want can be scary. But is it more or less scary than the thought of never stepping forward? We all decide what we step forward into and when. We are all telling our stories, and we are all telling ourselves stories about it all. Are you brave enough to walk with me into hearing, considering and understanding the stories we tell? Join me next time, where we'll be considering more stories and illusions and stepping into creating the freedom we desire. Every moment, we are who we are choosing to be. You choose. Choose you. Because your story matters.